Did you know that MTK kits come with digital files to use on your pages? All main kits come with printables and cut files, and I'm here today to help you get your digital cut files out of your phone and onto your pages, like this one. We've had some background files that include frames like this, or large pieces like the ornaments on this one. We've had backgrounds like this that you can fill in with colors, or like this, which I filled in partly with pattern paper and partially with cardstock. Sometimes our cut files are like this and can be layered with other items on your pages. Every main kit comes with two different types of cut files. One is a larger background cut file like this one. Sometimes it's full size like this, and sometimes it's smaller like this, or like this. So besides backgrounds, every main kit also comes with some icon files, and this layout shows an example of what some of those look like. There's usually at least one word and a couple of images to go together that support the theme of the kit. And in this case, we have this cut file of the marshmallows on sticks ready to be roasted, and we also have the trees right here, which I layered with some pattern paper from the kit. So if you've been receiving the main kits but feeling a little intimidated or not sure where to start, if you have an electronic die cutting machine and just aren't sure where to start with them, this video is for you. The first step is to find the digital downloads email that was sent to you by Mercy Tiara Scrapbooking. This is what it will look like on your screen. The email will be from Mercy Tiara Scrapbooking with the subject line, "Your downloads are ready." Once you find this email, open it up and look for a section that says download link, followed by a hyperlink. Go ahead and click on that link. It'll take you directly to the download page. On the download page, you'll be able to download the file. Make sure to save it to a place on your computer where you can easily find it later. Now, I'm showing this process on my phone, but I have iCloud access, so I can save the download from my phone to the cloud and then access it from my computer. If you don't have shared access like that between your phone and your computer, you'll need to download the file directly on your computer from the email. Okay, so what you want to start doing, I have you here on my computer, and some of this process might be different for you if you don't have a Mac, but the general concept should be pretty similar. The very first thing that you want to do after you've downloaded your digital files to a folder that you can access on your computer, you want to head on over to that folder. So in my case, I'm keeping mine in this folder on my desktop called MTK Cut Files. So I'm just going to double click that. I just downloaded these cheerful files. I'll show you the cheerful main kit and then a number and .zip. So I'm just going to disregard this one. It's from an upcoming kit, so we won't go into that one. But this one is the zip file. This is what it will look like on your computer when you've downloaded it. So the first thing that we need to do is unzip those zip files. So we're going to just double click it, and it very quickly opens it up in a separate folder here. As you can see, it says cheerful main kit, has the same number, but it no longer says .zip. That's because it's now a folder, and all of those zipped contents are in here. So in here, we have the printable PDF. So if you wanted to print up these gorgeous labels that coordinate with the kit, you could print these, you could open these up and send them to your printer right away. So that's one thing that you can do. But then you'll notice that there's a couple of other images here. We have the cheerful color palette. That's for anybody who was interested in using that to match with their current products. So you can use this to match with cardstock or inks or whatever else might be in your stash that you'd like to coordinate with. And so these are right here for you to use. You can either open it up on your phone and then bring your phone over to where your mists or your inks or cardstock is stored, or you could print this up and use it in that way. The nice thing about printing it up is that then you can use these spaces to punch shapes out of, and those shapes will match perfectly with your kit. So then you'll notice that there are these two other zip files. So there's zip files within the zip files, and that would be our cheerful background. So I'm going to double click on that, and it just automatically opens it up to cheerful background. And we have all of these files inside. And then I'm also going to double click on the Cheerful Icons zip, and that opens up this Cheerful Icons folder that has all of these files inside. So right now today we're going to focus on these two folders. One is the Cheerful Background files and one is the Cheerful Icons files. And you'll notice that within each of these folders, we have a number of files. They're all exactly the same file, but they're in different formats. So we have it in DXF, we have it in PNG, we have it in a .studio 3 and also in an SVG format. So this would be the background file. And then we have the exact same thing with the cheerful icons. So we're going to actually start with the SVG because the SVG is the most commonly used file type that you'll come across. SVG stands for Scalable Vector Graphic, and it usually comes out with a transparent background. This file type is really great because it's scalable, which means that you can expand it or shrink it, and it's not going to compromise the quality of that image. So we like SVGs, and this is the one that you are most likely to be using. If you have a silhouette and you do not have the designer software that comes with it, if you have the free version, then you will want to use the .studio 3 instead of the SVG. The PNG is a flat image that you can't take apart the way that you can take apart SVGs, and you also can't scale it up and down. So that PNG is in there just in case you need it, but most beginners are not going to be messing around with converting PNGs. And the same with DXF. DXF is very similar to an SVG, but in most cases, if you're using DXF, the SVG will work. So again, it's just there just in case you need it. Most people are either going to use the .studio 3 if you're on a silhouette, or the SVG if you're on a silhouette or a Cricut. I myself don't have Cricut Design Space, but I have read that you can bring SVGs right into the Cricut Design Space software. So what I'm about to show you, if you don't have a silhouette, it should work similarly in the Cricut Design Space. So I have and prefer my Silhouette Cameo as my cutting machine, and so this video is going to use the Silhouette Cameo as the example. My understanding is that the Cricut Design software, I think it's called Cricut Design Space, I think that that software is going to work pretty similar to this, although a lot of the words and labels for things in that software seem to be different than in the Cameo Studio software. So now that we have these files identified, we know right where they're at, we want to open up our Silhouette software. So in order to do that, I'm going to go down to my dock at the bottom, but you might have a different way of opening your software. I'm just going to go and click it right there. I do keep my Silhouette Studio in the dock. And now you'll notice as this comes up, take a look at it, because if yours doesn't say Designer Edition right in that spot down there, then that means that you have the basic software and you won't have full functionality of this software. And so I'll just show you that screen so that you can know where to look. So if you missed it when it was opening up, you just go into the top menu right here that says Silhouette Studio, and then you just go About, and that'll bring up this little sign here. And if it says Designer Edition here, then you know that you have the paid version of the app. The paid version of the app is, I believe, 37 something. I'm going to insert an image right here that shows you the cost of it in US dollars. And my opinion is that it is well worth the money. It really does increase your ability to tweak your images. If all that you want to do is open and cut and never change anything about any of your files, the free version of the software is fine. It's probably all that you need. But if ever you want to take things away, delete little parts, or do any kind of changing to the designs or make your own designs, you will definitely want the paid version of this software. So we'll just close that out. So as soon as you open up the software, I'm just going to take you for a little walk around the software before we get started. Adding this part, I think, will help those of you who are unsure and maybe haven't used the software very much, it will help you feel a little bit more familiar with it. It will make this video a lot longer than what it would be if I was just demonstrating how to open it. It's actually very quick and easy to open these files, but I think it's worth taking a little bit of time to walk you around the software. So depending on your software settings, you may open up to a screen that looks like this with your large cutting mat surface here. This is your canvas. And oftentimes your page setup panel will be open as soon as you open the software. I think that you might be able to change your settings so that this doesn't happen, but I like to have this open because it gives me a chance to just check and make sure that I'm using the right settings. So sometimes I change my mat to 8.5 by 11, so it's nice to have that option to remind myself that I have the proper cutting mat size. All of the rest of this is usually just left the same. And certainly if you're a new user, really the only thing that you're going to want to look at here is, are you set to 12 by 12? And I am, so that's good. If you never set this, it'll probably never be not 12 by 12. But I do go back and forth between 8.5 by 11 and 12, so it's nice to check that. These other tabs, I just wanted to show you that within this page setup panel here, we have 3 tabs here. The first one and the default one is this design area setup one. The next one is options. And if your screen looks different than mine, it might be because you don't have show grid on. I really like having show grid on because these squares are 1-inch squares. So this gives me a sense of how big something is going to be on my cutting mat. And it's really easy for me to say, like, okay, it's 1, 2, 3, 4. So, okay, that's about 4 inches. It just really makes it easier for me to visualize what it is that I'm going to be cutting. So I like to have the grid lines on. There are some snapping options here that if you're moving things around and they're snapping in a way that you don't like, you can come in here and turn them off. But I generally just leave them be. You can turn your ruler on and off, but I like to have mine on. And then that is about it for most basic needs. And then this last part of the panel here called registration marks, that's for when you're doing print and cut. And we won't be doing that with any of our MTK files, so we don't have to think about that for this. So once I've confirmed that that's all fine, I like to click out of that, just click the X box to get rid of it. That way I have a nice, clean, simple working space. We have this blue section up here in the top right-hand corner right here. And there are a few different things up here. We have design, which is where we're at by default. This shows us our working canvas. We have the store, which if I click this, it'll just open up another window that'll bring me to the Design Studio software store. I can purchase things from there if I wanted to. There's this tab here that brings me to my library. And I've been a Cameo user for a very long time, so I've got a number of different folders here dating back as far as 2014 here with some Scraptastic files. I've got a project here, a couple of projects for my daughter. I've got some of my own designs in here. And when I started the Kit Club, I made my own folder here that says MTK Cut files. You'll see that I have all my Scraptastic ones from before as well. What I find is that my library over time can get pretty crowded with lots of things. So if I didn't have any of these folders, I would click on designs and there would just be so many files in here that it would be really difficult to navigate. So I do recommend that you use folders to manage your files. And so right off the bat, what you can do is you can right click on the word designs and it'll give you an option to start a new folder. So you make a new folder and then you can title it MTK Designs or something like that. Maybe not in caps. As you can see, I already have a folder like that, so I'm going to delete this one that I just made as a sample, but here are all of the MTK designs that we have created over the past year and a half of being a Kit Club. This is one way, across the top here is one way to access the library. I'm going to show you another way, my preferred way to access the library in just a second, but before I do that, let's complete our little tour of the top right-hand tabs here. So we've got design, we've got store, we've got library, and now the last one here is send. If I had a design here, it would show red lines where the cut lines are going to be. And this is where this is the panel that you open up when you're ready to cut your file. So we're not ready yet. So let's go back to design and I will show you the other way to access your library. It's this little button down here that you might not notice because it's all by itself. And when you click on that, what you get is the split screen, and this is my preferred way to access my library because I can see my current canvas and I can also see all of my designs. And it'll by default open up whatever folder I was in last, but if I want to change to my own designs here, I can easily change to that. So if I wanted to drag, let's say this over there, I could easily do that like that, and then I can see what I've got and continue to browse and maybe add something to it, like maybe this one. We'll do that. I must have made that on Canva. And so as you can see, this is a really handy way to access your cut files. I'm going to delete all of these. So once we have our screen like this, there are two ways that we can get our MTK cut files into this software. And the easiest way, and the way that I usually do it, is I'll go over here and I'll double click on my folder so that it's opened. And then I'll go in and I'll grab, I want to go into cheerful, I want to go into cheerful background. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the SVG. I do have the designer edition of the software, so I'm going to take this cheerful background SVG and I'm going to drag it until it's on my canvas and drop it. Now it is not in my library. I can get it to my library and I'll show you how to do that. But another thing that I could do, so what I'll do is I'll just click on my Finder to bring up that folder again. And I want to drag and drop the cheerful SVG, but instead of dragging it onto my canvas, I'm going to drag it into my library here. So I'm just gonna leave it anywhere on here and drop it, and it shows up right here in my library. So now this is in my library. It's not on my sheet yet, but it is in my library. And that is a good place for it to be because that means that if I want to go back, maybe I've made some changes to it and I want to go back to the original, I have the original in my library. And so that is what I would recommend that you do, is that you pull it into your library right from the start. So that's the first way to get it into your library. The second way to get it into your library is to, let's delete it so that we can go get it again. So the second way is to go File and then Library and Import to Library. Now I am going to navigate to it. I'm going to go to my desktop, my folder, my cheerful files, my background, and my background SVG, just like that. So what it did was it put it into my user designs instead of in my MTK cut files, which this is probably my default folder. So anything that I open is probably going to go here by default. So I'm just going to take it and drag it, if I can just get it. So you want it to be gray in order to do anything with it. So it's gray now. So now I can drag it into MTK files. So now it's right here where I was expecting it to be. So there it is. It's in my library. So those are the two ways to get it into your library. Now, if you choose the open, it's going to open it on this page, but it won't be in your library yet. You'll have to save it to your library. So let's just say, let's delete it again. And you can open it in one of two ways. You can either drag and drop it onto your sheet like I showed you a second ago. So that would be like this. Here I'm opening it. It's not in my library, but I've opened it. I'm going to delete it so that I can open it another way. So the other way that you open it is using this open button. And it's going to give you can navigate to it, but it's already navigated to it for me here because I've been into this folder so much. And then I say, okay. And here it is. It shows up right here on my canvas. And you'll notice it is still not in my library yet. Now, if I want to get it into my library, all that I have to do is go to File, Save As, and Save to Library. And then I can say where I want it to go. So right now it knows that it's called cheerful background.studio3, and I can choose for it to go into here by saying okay. It does take a little while. Oh, it's making me sign in again for whatever reason. There we go. So there it is. There are a number of ways to get it to your library. What I would suggest that you do is just find the way that is the easiest for you, write down the steps of how to do it, and then just always do it that way. So for me, I just drag and drop them into my library. That's my favorite way. So that's what I'm going to do here right now. I'm going to delete my both cheerful files so that you can see how easy this is. So if you were doing this and not making a video that explains all about how Silhouette works, then all that you'd have to do is you've put your files here and you've unzipped them, right? So now you're just going to go in, you're going to find your background file, you're going to take that SVG or the Studio 3, and you're going to drag it into here. And there it is. And then you're going to take I'm going to just click out of that. It keeps wanting my password because I'm not logged into this to the shop. Then I'm just going to grab that folder again, grab the Cheerful Icons SVG, and drag it right into here. And now there's that. And just disregard this. And so there we go. I've got it on my, so normally if I had done that, I would not have that on my canvas. So I'm going to just delete this, don't save that. Okay, so here we are. This is what it would look like if I had just done what I just did without doing all the other stuff first. We'd have our cheerful background right here and our cheerful icons right here. And now how do we get them onto our page? We know that we could have dragged them right on there, but then they wouldn't be in the library. So how do we get them on the page? It's so easy. You just double click it and boom, it's right there. Double click this, boom, and it's right there. Now, you might say, wait a minute, where did my background go? It's right here. So as you work in Silhouette Studio, if things ever go missing, immediately look up here because what's probably happened is they've opened a new canvas for you. So if I wanted multiple things on one canvas, all that I would have to do is, first of all, make sure that it's gray. So make sure that it's selected, and then you just drag and drop it. And now I have this along with these on the same canvas, which might be good if I wanted to cut them out of the same space. It's a good way to save on paper. I could just arrange these so that they were not overlapping at all with the other things. And that might be hard for these pieces right here. So maybe I would move the stars down like that. And like that. Put the tree ornaments here and here. And then just, oops, I'd want to move this like, well, I guess I'd probably want to move this like this. And then I'd want to get a hold of this little guy and move it up there. And now, oops, this needs to come down just a little bit. But now I could cut this whole thing with my Silhouette Cameo and I'd have all of those cuts with just one pass through. Now you might think to yourself, I wish that I could make this be a full page, and I will show you how to do that in just a second. As you can see, you can drag and drop things just by making sure that they're selected. So you know that it's selected by when it has this box around it. The box shows you the measurements too, which is really handy if you're cutting things to certain sizes. So we know that this Christmas ornament here is 1.1 inch by 3.2 inches. I can pick it up and drag it around. I can also, if I needed it to fit in a certain space, I could move it and twist it in any way. This is actually not going to fit better, but there we go. So we can do So these are all pretty straightforward, easy, basic things that you can do, whether you have the free version or not. It's just if you had the free version, you'd be using a .studio file, not an SVG, but it would work exactly the same way. So another really handy thing is to know about is the zoom feature. Now, one way to zoom in and to zoom out is to press this button up here on the top. We can zoom in to really see how these files are going to look up close and whether they might be touching each other. What I'm doing here is a 2-finger drag in order to move the canvas around. And then unfortunately, it does not pinch and it does not respond to pinching. You have to go up here and use these buttons here for zooming in and zooming out. Or you can use the shortcut. Now, keyboard shortcuts are not something that I usually like, but there are a couple of them that are very handy. I don't like keyboard shortcuts because I usually forget them, but this one is handy because it's a little cumbersome to go up here and click and wait for it to show. So Command plus will bring you in, and Command minus will bring you out. And I find that one is pretty easy to remember. It's also the same shortcut across multiple different software. So you might already know it from another app that you might use. So again, that's Command and then in, and then plus, 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 minus, minus, minus. So that's very, very handy. The other thing is that if you ever get yourself messed up where you've done something and suddenly you're like, oh no, that's not the way I want that to be, but you don't even know what you've done, you can use this back arrow to undo whatever you just did. And the shortcut for that is Command Z, which is the same as it is in other software. So it just redid my zoom out. So there we go. Another handy one is let me just go into these icons here. Another handy one is to be able to duplicate something. So I might want to duplicate this. I can right click on it and go down to duplicate, and then I've got 2 of them. So if I wanted to print up a whole bunch of these, I could just keep on duplicating them. There is also a feature over here, which you might not have all of these things over here. You might not be able to see them at all, or they might be grayed out and not working. But there's a duplication panel here, or a replicate panel, and this allows you to replicate things in a very precise way. Like this one replicates it and puts it exactly the next one over. So these are a more advanced feature. It's good to use if you're filling a page with stickers or something like that. It makes it very efficient. But like I said, if you don't have the designer version of the software, you might not even have that. So don't worry too much about that. You can always poke around this software. It's very, very powerful and well worth those $37 or whatever it is US for the software. And it is a one-time fee. It's not a subscription. The other thing that you might want to do is group things, and I'll tell you why. Because if you like the scale of some of these things, like you might like how all of these trees are to scale with one another. So we'll just get rid of these. So I'm just pressing delete, highlight, like select it and delete, select it and delete. There were 2 on that one because I had replicated it. So a word of caution about resizing. When you select something, you can resize it. Let me just move this over here so that you can see it properly. So we have a bunch of different corners here. When you're resizing, I highly recommend that you always resize from a corner. When you resize from a corner, it will keep its aspect ratio. These are SVGs, so I can make this massive and it's not going to pixelate it. So that is good. But if I try to resize it from a side like this, it's going to distort it. And if I resize it like this, it's going to distort it. And maybe you want that, but you might not. So just be cautious of that. If you find yourself and you accidentally distorted something, you can use that back button or Command Z to make it go to exactly what you wanted it to be. And if you ever get to the point where you're kind of feel like you wish that you didn't make all the changes that you made, you can always just bring another copy of the whole thing over here. And now we have all of our originals once again. Now you'll notice that when I brought these over and I went to move them, they didn't move as a single unit. If you want things to move as a single unit, I'm just going to highlight all of them and delete them. Then I'm going to bring them over again like this. There we go. As soon as I let go, these are now all individual units, so I can't drag them as a unit anymore. But if I highlighted them all by dragging like that, another way to select them all is to select and then hold shift. So if I want to select them, I can either drag and select the whole space that has them, and now when you're moving them, you want to make sure that your pointer looks like a finger. So as long as it looks like a finger, I can move it. If it looks like a arrow, then I'm going to unselect it when I click. So make sure that it's a finger as long. So there, now it's a finger. So now I can move it around, and now it's an arrow. So it's going to unselect it. Another way to select these is to, if you want to select just certain ones, is to select it and then press the shift button. And now I'm selecting only certain ones, and I can move them specifically around. So that would be good if I wanted to grab, for example, just these trees. I could grab them and bring them all down, maybe down here, so that I could resize them, and I want them to all resize together, so I'll leave them selected like this. Now, it might be handy at some point for me to keep these together as a group even after I unselect them, and so if I want that to happen, I just go up here. This is my group button. So I just selected group, and now they are a group, and even if I click off of them, it's still going to treat them as a group. I can easily ungroup them just by making sure they're selected and going and pressing the button right next to group. So group, I can't group them anymore because they're already grouped. So the button beside it, ungroup selected shapes, that's what I click on. And now they have their individual boxes around them, so they're individual shapes. And now I can go back to using them as individuals. So those are handy little tricks to know about just basics of changing these items. Let's get rid of all of these. Oops, I got rid of them all, but that's no problem because it's just in my library, so I can easily get it again. That's a really good reason to put them in your library. You don't have to worry about that kind of thing. So if we want this to print so that it looks like this, what we want to do, like filling the whole 12 by 12 sheet, what we want to do here is select our image here, because these are often sized just a little bit smaller than 12 by 12. If we wanted to fill a whole 12 by 12 page, we want to make sure, first of all, make sure that you're dragging from a corner. So we want to select it, and then we want to hover around this little square here until we get an arrow. So we don't want to click now, or we'll just click off of it. What we want to do is click when it looks like this, when it looks like the arrow. So it looks like the arrow right now. Wait, but first I'm going to move it because I want it to be aligned on the bottom here. I've got it on snap, so it's going to jump around a little bit. So I'm just going to bring this up and drag it. And what you'll notice, I'm just going to put it back for a second so that you can see. This red line here around the outside of my canvas, this is the limit of where the machine can cut. So even though you can put a 12 by 12 paper on here, you can't cut all the way to the edge of a 12 by 12. You can cut almost to the edge. So what I like to do is when I'm making this fit, I like first of all, I'm going to go into pages, into my page setup panel, and I'm going to turn off snapping. I don't want any snapping on right now. I just want to be able to do this my way. So we're going to turn off the snapping, and I'm going to bump this out. And here's the deal. If I put this so that it's just barely on the red lines, and then I set it to print, if my paper isn't exactly perfectly aligned with the edges of my cutting mat, I might get like a double. Editing Tracy here, what I'm trying to say is that I don't want my Cameo to try to cut around the outside edges of this frame, because the edge of the paper already is the outside edges of that frame. And if I don't position my cut file so that the black lines are outside of the cutting area, my Cameo, if the paper isn't exactly perfectly placed, my Cameo will try to cut along the outside edges and it won't be perfect. I would rather just keep the manufactured edge on the outside edges. So that's what I'm trying to describe here. I hope that it makes sense. Cut there. So what I like to do is make sure that I'm going just a little bit beyond that that red space. So I like to cover all of the white on my canvas so that the black is covering all of the white. But I don't want to go too far off, because if I do, then like if I were to cut it like this, for example, all of this black isn't going to be on there at all. It's just going to be these sticks, these branches, and they're not going to be connected to anything. So they're all going to be just individual branches. I want the frame, so I want to make sure that I'm keeping the frame in my image, but I just want to fill the white. So there's a slight delay in the software, so you just want to kind of be patient with it. You'll get used to it as you use it. So at this point, we're done with the library, so I can actually open this up so that I can see it with my whole page. And I'm going to do the same down here. I'm just going to gently move it until it is exactly where I want it to be. So again, we've just filled the white space. So the whole thing is covered in black, but I still have a nice even border on each side, on each of my 4 sides. And if you want to see what where the cut lines are, because all of this is reversed, it's sometimes handy to look at the send menu so that you can see where the cut files are going to be. As you see, it's going to cut along here, and this is going to be a very fine, narrow design. So you can always flip back and forth to see how your cuts are going to look. So for example, we can see here that this is going to cut all of those little dots are going to be little cutout dots in this cut file. So this is going to be the outline. Once you have something set up the way that you want it to be, like let's say we want to print this, we want to cut it, not print it. So then that's when you go to your send menu. As I said, you could have been here a couple of times before, just checking it out to make sure it's all looking good. But when you're ready to do your cutting, what you want to do is have a look here. Now this is telling me that I don't have my Cameo because it's not turned on. So I'm going to go turn it on. I'll be right back. So I like to, as a beginner, I like to stay on the simple menu. There are more elaborate things here with different lines. You can get your Cameo to cut different lines differently so that some of them are cutting deep and some of them are cutting narrow and thin. We don't need to worry about that for our purposes today. We'll just keep it on the simple menu. And in here, we want to choose our material. I almost always pick cardstock, the thicker cardstock. Where is it? Cardstock textured heavy. All of my MTK cut files, I cut on these settings, which is cardstock textured heavy. So when I selected that, it changed these settings here to be what it's preset for that kind of paper. Now, blade depth of 3, which is not very deep, a force of 30, which is decently, a speed of 4, which is pretty fast, and passes 1. The thing that I always change is I will always do 2 passes when I'm cutting cardstock like this. I just find, especially with a cut file that is this intricate and detailed, what I would do is I would put this speed down to 2, maybe even 1, just to make sure that it cuts nicely along all these edges. And I might even bump up the blade depth a little tiny bit, just so that I don't have to pick at these little details. All of these little tight cuts, especially where they're sharp, we want to make sure that those are very well cut. So increasing my blade depth a tiny bit and passes to 2. This is easy for me to figure out because I've been using this machine for a very long time. I do recommend that you play around with your machine. Cut these files. I would say cut them even if you're not sure you're going to use them, just so that you're playing with it and getting used to and familiar with how your machine works. Because my blade depth of 4 might be too deep for you, and maybe you don't need 2 passes. I almost always do 2 passes. So definitely play around with these settings and just know that you can't mess it up. If I kind of get mixed up and I'm like, how much did I change that again? I can just click revert and it's setting it back to whatever the default is for that material. For the purposes of these sorts of cut files, you want to be using your cut as your action, and auto blade is the best blade to use. You can get different specialty blades, but this is the blade to use for this. And then you just want to make sure that you've got cut. If you have no cut selected, you're not going to see red lines here and nothing will cut. So the main thing to keep in mind about this page when you're on the send page is that if you don't see red, it's not going to cut. So you've got to see the red lines there. So once you load your cutting mat, this will change. Right now it says no media loaded, so I can't actually send this right now. But once you load your media, you can do a test cut if you want. A test cut will find a little place that isn't part of the cut, and it'll just cut a little triangle to test it. That can be a good way if you've only got one piece of paper to work on and you don't want to risk it. That can be a good way to test on a small piece. So there you have it. That is how you use the MTK Cut files. The only other thing that I will remind you is to just make sure that you've got room behind your cutting machines. If you keep your machine pushed back against a wall or on a shelf, just make sure that you pull it out so that it's got room for your mat to go in and out behind your machine, as well as room in front of your machine. And that's it. That's all you need to know to use the MTK Cut files. I hope that you found this helpful. Let me know in the comments below if you were able to get your Cameo machine working with your MTK Cut files based on this video. If anything was unclear, please let me know. I tried to follow my notes so that I would be clear, but let me know if anything isn't, if you have any remaining questions. And also let me know if you'd like me to cover any other technicalities about using the cut files. I will do my best. I'm no expert on this software, but if I can figure it out, I'm happy to show you how to do it too. Take care and have yourselves a really great scrappy week.